1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Cool. Feel like pretty good to go? All right, thanks, man. All right, everybody feeling squirrely after dinner? So we're going a little bit past our 7 o'clock point here for our next speaker. Thank you, everyone. I know it takes a little bit to get settled after dinner, and I hope everything was wonderful for you. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker here, and his name's Dave Barnett, and he's a rocket scientist, which is pretty cool in itself, but it sounds like his journey's taken him and propelled him even to different territory than that. So with a warm welcome, let's welcome Dave, and he's got some really cool things to share with us. Come on up. Thank you.
Can I get that in the stand?
Yeah, you like it?
Yeah, cool. That's fine.
You want to go with the mic stand?
He wants to use it.
Yeah. No, that worked. That looks good. Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming back after dinner. And I hope to make this exciting enough that you won't get into slumbers. So we'll move forward. I'm talking about the return of the ancient goddesses and balancing the divine masculine and the divine feminine. A little bit about my background. I am a rocket scientist. There's stuff out there that's on its way out of the solar system that has my name and my thumbprint on it. I worked for Lockheed Martin for 19 years. I'm still involved in aerospace, but that work is diminishing even as my spiritual work is increasing. And I find at a number of key points in my life, the big hands have come down and made things happen for me. That first happened in 1983. I went to my 10th high school reunion, ran into a guy who asked me, "Dave, did you become an electrical engineer like you planned?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you think it's possible to change things at a distance?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he kept beating around the bush. He was a disc jockey. He said, "Come over to my house, let me show you some things." We went to his house. We walked up to the electric meter. He said, "Do you have an idea of the rate of the wheel?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Now." And it slowed by a third. And he said, "I did this to my mother's house several months ago, and her bills are still lower." Wow, okay. What else? And we sat in his car, and it was idling. And he says, "Now." And he could slow down the idle to the point where it would stall. And he said, "I can do this to other cars in traffic." That's a pretty handy gift to have. I would like to have that gift. We went to his radio station. He could lower the output power of a 50,000 watt radio station, FM station. We went in his house. He had a TV that was on rabbit ears. He put on a snow channel, which in Wichita is not hard to find. And he could tune in a channel. Well, it kind of made the hair come up on the back of my neck. I was open to the idea of ESP. I'd been raised that way, even though I was an engineer, because I'd had a few phenomenal things happen to me, but nothing like this. And I returned to Denver. I'd moved out in 81. This was in 83. And I came back to Denver, and I felt like this experience was too particular to me and my skills being an electrical engineer and showing me things that can't be explained by electrical engineering. I've got to dig into it. And I started on many traditions, and one of them was healing. And the healing really stuck with me. And being an aerospace engineer, it's hard to hang out a shingle in the 80s or 90s saying, "Dave Barnett, aerospace engineer and healer." That was a little difficult, so I kind of did on the sly, and I talked to people about being Clark Kent and Superman, so I go to work as Clark Kent. And 1999, things started firing up. I left Lockheed in 2000, went to a small renewable energy company, lasted there about 3 years. It wasn't going great places, and got some contracts with the Air Force to do research and development for little spacecraft. And the big voice came down in my head and said, "You have all the schedule you need, you have all the money you need, go learn everything you can about healing." and things just kept manifesting and unfolding for me. I went to acupuncture school for a couple semesters, and as a great grounding in Chinese medicine, it wasn't for me, but it was nice experience. Psychic mentoring, I went to about 6 or 7 different modalities of healing, including Psyche, and things just kept opening up. I went through that type of awakening that, for those of you who know what it means when I say I know that I know that I know, happened in 2006. And then more gifts started coming through where reading Akashic Records, they just opened like a book for me on doing past life readings. I also got into energy clearing. A person who was referred to me at random said, I have stuff going on in my house, doors slamming, people walking up behind me, talking behind my head, scaring my kids. Can you do anything? Well, I've never done this before, and let me take a shot. And what the woman had found out after she got a bargain on the house was that the previous owner had been an elderly man who was a recluse, and he hanged himself in the basement. And that's why they got a really good deal, and nobody would tell them why. And I did clear that gentleman, and one of my public service projects I jokingly refer to is my archangel companions have taken me down to depths of hell. And I don't believe that there's an objective hell, but if you believe in a hell and you have a clear vision of it, you can manifest it and put yourself there if you think you belong there. And so, sort of like Dave's public service project, I go down there quite frequently and help those people understand its illusion and return them to a spiritual plane. And he was down there causing problems with the connection still to the house. And so that's sort of my first house clearing. So I do a lot of energy and entity clearing. But other gifts have continued to manifest. I've gone through, you can choose to call it walk-in or soul braiding experiences with higher versions of myself that have brought in additional gifts. And I've also tied into other communities. So I have been initiated as a Heyoka, and I've also, in a visionary setting, sat with Grandfather of the West and Grandfather of the Stars and shared a pipe and was given the pipe and made a grandfather. So these things are very dear to me and have tied me into many different realms from many different perspectives. So now you know sort of where I stand or sit. You can appreciate a little bit more of my background. I do lots of shamanic journeying. I feel blessed hearing about other people's family situations. My dad was both an engineer and an Episcopal priest, if you can imagine that combo. And he died in February, but over the past 5 or 6 years, I've been talking about my spiritual journey. And when he received the diagnosis of inoperable lung cancer, I was able to talk to him about what he would encounter in the spiritual plane, not the sort of the fable or fairy tale version of, streets paved in gold and pearly gates and all that, but actually what he would encounter in that experience in his transition. And he could take that to heart, and it was very comforting to him. And since he's been over there, I've talked to him just like I talked to many people who've gone in spirit. To me, they're still very much alive and still very much available, but I try not to keep them attached to our plane. They have many other things to do and learn. Part of my experience in being there is also working with very high vibrational beings, and a lot of that energy comes through me, and so I've been gifted with being involved in some other projects, and this Goddesses one is one of those. What I'd like to do, though, is take you in the Wayback Machine on goddesses and humans, and this story it's more conventional archaeology and anthropology, and so it may differ from some of the other stories you hear here. I don't think that makes anyone more or less valid. I think there's also multiple realities. But if we look at the beings that the universe has used to be kind of like its hands or its boots on the ground around us, we have angels, we have archangels. We have sort of the Holy Family, however you define that. People access that. We have ascended masters and teachers from Eastern traditions, other traditions, including Native American. We have very advanced extraterrestrials who are looking out for us, and they sort of can also be the hands of the Creator. And we have gods and goddesses. if you think back, let me paint a picture for you. You have people in the caves about 40 to 45,000 years ago. They're worried about their health and well-being. And the thing that's interesting about them is that they start to develop a cosmology. And a significant cosmology for them is the Gaia, or the Earth Mother. And there are thousands of these little statuettes. When they learn how to bake mud and turn it into a fired object, one of the things that's really survived everywhere are these little Earth Mother goddesses. And they're the ones with the huge pendulous breasts, or the big belly, the big legs. And you think, why would they do that? Because these folks are probably on a starvation diet. And part of it is, I'm sure they started to see a correlation between, if you have a big mother who's getting lots of calories, they wouldn't know how to define that, but big, healthy mother, she's more likely to have at least 3 of her 10 kids make it to maturity versus 1 out of 10. So that's coming through, and what's also coming through is sort of the model that, we see that you push a seed into the ground, and we wait a little while, and something grows out. That looks a lot like people. So what does a man do? He plants a seed in a woman. And that myth actually extended clear up into about the 1800s and caused some problems for the traditional church, because we have stories out of the Bible, and it's incredible that for the fundamentalists that if the hand of God wrote the Bible, God didn't know that a sperm and an egg came together in a woman versus the man planting a little tiny human in the woman that had no genetics from the woman, and it grew up to be a big human. That's a problem in 1800s when they discovered that a woman has an egg and contributes half the DNA. So they had this mythology, and it was so wondrous to them because of what they saw, that they idolized the woman. They idolize the idea that there's a Mother Earth. They idolize the thing that the crops grow out. They can gather fruits. They can gather plants. And it takes care of their needs, to the point where when somebody dies, they would return them to a grave, to the womb. They didn't just discard the body, which you would think would be the logical thing in that time frame when things are tough. They went through some type of ritual. They also went through a ritual where they started painting caves. And the entrance to the cave looked very much like the entrance to the birth canal on a woman, even to the point of vegetation outside might be groomed to actually look like, entering the genitals of a woman. And that's where they would take the young men for initiation rites, take them into the dark cave, way into the deep recesses, and then suddenly light the torches. They'd see all these images that are fantastic, and the realism on them and the style is just wonderful. And you think, how did they do that? I mean, did they have scaffolds to get up there and paint? I mean, this was a real work of love and art, and it also very much looked like returning to the womb and taking the young people, probably young men in that time, to the womb of the Mother Earth. And so you very much have a goddess tradition then. So if we start looking, coming forward a little bit, a funny thing happened around 12,000 BC, give or take. They still have a hard time explaining this. I would have a hard time explaining this. We suddenly have hybridized grain crops, where a community, rather than having to use up the food in an area, move to a new area over and over and over, they can start civilizing an area and having more permanent structures, which might give them safety and security. But to do that, they need to have crops. And so they took grasses and somehow magically they hybridized them to the point where they had seed crops with grain. Fruit trees were hybridized. So there were trees that had little runty things that probably weren't very food-like, and then they started having fruit trees. They had domesticated animals. And if you think that that's trivial, there's still a lot of animals we can't domesticate. You can't domesticate a zebra. There are other wild horses that can't be domesticated. Typically, we have domesticated elephants, but we also have African elephants that aren't going to be domesticated. Your you're playing with fire if you try to use one of those in a circus act, because sometimes instincts come through. So dogs, cats, cattle, goats, pigs, all these things got domesticated. And it's like, who flipped that switch? And so what we end up with is we have permanent sites, we have agrarian-based communities, we have buildings, and we start getting recorded languages. Where did they get this? And if you read some of the Sitchin books, we have a lot of ET influence on coming down and helping people with these technologies. To me, this is very much like the idea of how did they move the blocks for the pyramids? You know, the Great Pyramid on their timeline would have taken a block being moved and placed every 70 seconds. That's a whole lot of people sawing those out with rudimentary copper tools and little chipping hammers and moving at 20 miles across the desert. Some of these things really stretch the imagination on current explanations using what we propose as a story. So I do truly believe, and from what I see and get intuitively, that we did have lots of help. And where did that help come from? Probably ETs. And what would have been the natural response of those people back then? It's, wow, we don't know what to call those people, so we're going to make them into deities. And they come and go, and they have advanced skills, just like we would see to a certain degree if some of these advanced beings actually showed up on the White House lawn and said, yeah, we can do this and that, we can pop in, we can pop out and stuff like that. And you say, oh my goodness, you must be godlike. So we would still do that, except for maybe the people in this room and the people watching this video stream. So if we move forward, we continue with a model that has worship veneration of earth mothers and goddesses as a source of life. Food comes from the ground. It seems pretty logical. Water comes from the ground. People are placed in the graves as a return to the womb of the mother. Well, we can't ignore the superstition around women. Men have had a fascination with women probably for tens of thousands of years, because a lot of us would jokingly say we still don't understand them. But back then, they had some other magical properties. I'm sure those early people noticed that if you get a cut, you bleed, and if you get too big a cut and you bleed too much, you die, and yet women would bleed every month and they didn't die. So what is magically special about a woman? Kind of scary for a guy. And then pregnancy. I can't imagine what a prehistoric person would think on watching the first birth of a child. Wow, you know, how did that get in there? How is that coming out of there? This is, I mean, it was pretty impressive for me when I attended my daughter's birth. Wow, I just, you aren't quite prepared for it until you see it. And the idea of how do babies get started, and they probably made a correlation between sex and babies pretty early, but what is there magical about that union, and what is exchanged there to plant the seed, so to speak, sort of like a farming or a seed plant model. So then what changed? Because obviously we don't live like that anymore. So we had increasing population pressure, we had regional changes in crop production, maybe due to climate change. It's hard for us to look at the pyramids and think, wow, these are grassy, treed areas, because all we see is sand now. But at one time, they were much different on their climate. Another thing that happened were advanced weapons, metal-tipped weapons out of the Bronze Age that changed a whole balance of power. And it suddenly put into place that you could have nomadic groups where it was easier to go around and conquer other groups and steal what they had or demand a tribute payment than it was to do it yourself. And what that basically starts to say is, okay, from the guy's point of view, you know, might makes right. And so it really started to change the dynamic. And so you end up with a big split between the agrarian communities with goddesses, and you had nomads who had patriarchal king gods. So we really started to get into the split, and the tougher the life, the more nomadic a group was, the more they were aligned with a God who portrayed the virtues of a man on basically physical strength. Didn't have to be particularly smart, but needed physical strength. And particularly when you look at all the myths over history, there are a lot of strong gods, but they sure have a lot of poor judgment, and they kind of needed that civilizing influence of the goddesses. But we end up with major Greek and Roman models. So when the Romans conquered a group, the subjects had to honor the Roman gods and goddesses because Rome attributed their success as a society over centuries. I mean, we're proud to be around for 250 years. They're around 800 or 900 years with sort of the same model. And that was one of the big pressures, around the time of when the Christians were emerging out of the Jewish group is, you can keep your own gods when we conquer you, but you still have to honor ours because ours are what we attribute our success to. We have household gods, we have major gods, we have this god, that god. You can create whatever god you want. In fact, you can keep your gods. Well, there's one pesky group that they finally gave up. They just weren't going to reform them, and that was the Jews. The Jews were monotheistic. They had Yahweh or Jehovah, however you like to say it, and the Romans finally just gave up. And since the proto-Christians were Jews who were evolving into a new model, they enjoyed that protection until around AD 70 or 80 when Jerusalem finally said, we're going to throw those Romans out, we're going to show them. And the Romans came back and said, we're going to flatten Jerusalem and everything in a 10-mile radius, and bad things happened. And suddenly the Christians found themselves on their own without being able to call themselves Jews because they didn't join in that fight. And then suddenly the Christians became an object of threat to the Romans and periodically went through purges. But once again, they were monotheistic, and they had a patriarchal-oriented God. So we move forward, and what happens in 325, we have Constantine winning a battle, attributing it to his oath of allegiance to the Christian God. He was successful, and then he said, okay, that's it. We're going to have the Roman Catholic Church, or we're going to have Christianity be the religion of the whole Roman Empire. And that started to create a few problems because there were all kinds of other religions throughout that whole basin from the Western Roman area to the Eastern Roman area, and it went all the way through Europe. And so you had all these groups, including the Romans themselves, who had their gods and goddesses. They'd grown up. Think about the tradition. They'd grown up, their parents, their grandparents, great-grandparents, everybody had these major gods that they worshipped as part of the empire, as well as their household gods. They had the god of the hearth. They had the god of the door. They had the god of fertility maybe in their house. And suddenly they're told, you got to get rid of all those. Well, that probably didn't go over very well, and I suspect that's the reason we ended up with so many saints who have specialties in the Roman Catholic Church. If you think about it, I'm an Episcopalian. My dad was an Episcopal priest. It always puzzled me why you would have the patron saint of firefighters, the patron saint of cops, the patron saint of travelers, the patron saint of maybe alcoholics. I don't know. All these people who, if you look back in history, probably to a certain degree replaced the gods and goddesses that were allowed or encouraged in Roman society, among other things. What you also saw was the evolution where they took the goddesses from France, from England, from Spain, from Italy, all the backwoods places, and smashed their temples. They built churches on top of their sacred temple sites, and they prohibited the worship of the traditional, gods and goddesses, but particularly the goddesses in the woods. Along the way there too, you also start seeing trends in descriptions of the goddesses where even in the literature, under the guise of being the myths of the ancient times, You see the patriarchal gods ascending in power, even if they're dunderheads, frankly. Zeus could be a pretty problematic guy, but you see the goddesses being pushed down. And the goddesses are turned into bitchy wives like Hera. They're turned into witches like Hecate. They're turned into lesser things. They're really disrespected, disregarded, or the ones that were very persistent, like Isis worship, migrated into, well, that's actually that Mary energy. And there's some people who, say, well, in the Catholic Church you venerate Mary, but in some places the Catholic churches even had to go in and intervene because they said there's too much worship of Mary here, and they call that Marianism. And so Mary sort of became a catch-all because the early church did something very interesting. It's a long word. It's called sacerdotalism, but the idea there is that, only the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, can talk to God on your behalf. And, oh, by the way, only trained clergy can talk to Jesus. So if you want to contact somebody up there, you have to go through the switchboard that's Mary or saints. You can't do it directly. You are isolated. And so I think that's why you see so much of the Mary influence in the Roman Catholic Church, is because that was one of the few religious concepts that was accessible to people. So things are marching on, but what's happened, with the exception of some societies around the planet, Native American is one that to some degree was successful in resisting the Christian church, in other cases wasn't, but South Pacific, some of the African societies that resisted missionaries a little bit, you still ended up with some of the goddesses maintaining a position of reverence and power. But in most cases, you see them get turned into myths or stories, and not only that, they're denigrated, so they lose their power. Even in Hinduism, where it looks like you have some very powerful goddesses, some of them are, but a lot of them where you have a god and goddess pairing, you end up with a powerful god, and then you end up with a consort. And the consort does not have the power of a full goddess in the way that they interpret powers. And there are a few there, though, like Kali Ma, if you've seen those images. Now, to us, they're so out of our cultural context that for many people it's hard to understand. If you view it as just sort of, it's an image to be sort of like the Native American grandfather of the West image. It's a person who, or I say a spiritual power that as you approach it, it helps essentially smash the hell out of you into bits and pieces to get rid of the walls that you've erected around yourself to allow you to have a spiritual insight as you reassemble. So sort of like the shamanic journey, where frequently in shamanic experience, you see your body totally smashed down to smithereens, the bones are broken apart, everything, and then you reform as part of your new self. And so there are traditions around the planet like that, and so Kali Ma is one of those to help people find that and discover it. Well, what's been happening, I'm just watching my time here, what's been happening spiritually for us, I work with a spiritual group, and there are spiritual edifices in the spiritual plane, and what came through recently is the goddesses are ready to come back. And this isn't just hypothetical goddesses. The first batch that showed up was 147 of them, and 22 of them were essentially the concept of a deified ET type of energy. And since then, it's gone up to 160. And this is the whole spectrum. I think we're going to start seeing the Athena energy showing up, the Venus energy, the Kuan Yin will show up as more of a walk the planet and people will see this energy, will see this being. Native American grandmother spider, Quayaka, Haumea in Hawaii, Pele in Hawaii, Celtic gods and goddesses, African goddesses. I mean, all these societies all over the planet had goddesses, and there was a reason, and so much of them got swept under the carpet. And the reason they're coming back is we have to get back to a point of restoring the balance of the divine masculine and divine feminine. We're so out of balance there. My personal feeling, my personal insight is a lot of the Middle East problem is to wake up a lot of people and have them say, you know, I guess I'm finally sick and tired of having two groups battling over, I'm pleasing my patriarchal daddy God by killing you, and hopefully I can do it faster than you can do it to us. And we're going to keep on doing this. We've done it for centuries, and we want to keep on doing it for centuries more. I think that part of that purpose of that type of conflict is so that people will wake up and say, we've had enough. And I think a lot of the goddess energy is going to manifest both in men who need it, but also in women who are discovering their power. And we'll talk about what that power might look like to finally get to the point where we can get away from this type of ridiculous conflict. I personally see no value in having issues being fought over who is the proper inheritor from Muhammad 1,500 years ago. Wow, really? So once you get done fighting the great Satan of the West, then you guys are going to duke it out among yourselves to see who's going to dominate the control of Islam? Really? I mean, you kind of choke up a little bit when you hear this is a religion of peace. I have a hard time with that. I know Christianity went through their own thing. Judaism had conflicts in the Old Testament. There's a reason that we have Israelites and we have Jews. One came from Israel and one came from Judah. And they had their own fights before things settled down and they sort of integrated. We need to get to the point where we quit personifying the Creator, however we envision that, as the wise old guy in the sky to whom we make contracts and deals, and we say, we honor you by making everybody else look like us and worshiping you. We need to get away from that, and a big part of that, I believe, is bringing in and helping manifest the goddesses coming in and the divine feminine. So where do we go with this, or how does it look? I apologize up front if I hit a hot button for some women. Obviously, I'm not a woman. Obviously, from my work in Akashic Records, I know I've been one in other lifetimes, but I won't fall back on that and say, well, that gives me an excuse. But so what might this look like for women as we go through a rapid spiritual evolution? Because I believe this is going to happen very quickly. I believe people are going to have a lot of revelations. When we talk about people who get excited about approaching some type of awakening or enlightenment, we talk about somebody having their hair on fire looking for a pond to jump into. And I think this is going to be that way for a lot of women as they get ignited with this. One of the things I see is women don't talk about this very much, but some women have talked to me about it and say it's a common thing, and that's releasing the innate fear of physical harm by men. I mean, there is this consciousness that goes around that women do not have the physical body strength of men, and there is just an innate fear of men. As you walk by somebody who's a stranger, if he wanted to, he could severely harm me. And we certainly need to get past that, where there's this respect of each of the other sexes based on their skills and gifts, innate talents, how they choose to express them, without having a fear of, wow, just because I'm more petite, I'm at risk. getting away from being told by others as a woman of what I am. I think both as a man and I have to believe as a woman, there is a reluctance to have other people tell you this is what you are. Our experience is so diverse, as you've heard speakers up here talk about the diversity of discovering who and what you are, where you are, what you're doing. I think many of you have gone through that exploratory path, and the last thing I'm going to do is tell you what it is you are or what you have to be. Women can understand their core and can know it and can be their core. Another part is men frequently come from a position of what I need, and I'm sure the men in here can identify it, and if it's not you, it's your friends. Women come from a place of what I want, and I think women who open up and grow are a lot more conscious of what they want out of life, where they're going, than men are. I think there's just because of our culture and our societal expectations, there's a whole lot of cultured men about what you're expected to be. You know, we finally got past the point where men can't hug or men can't cry, although it's still hard for a lot of people. But we're still hung up in some other places, and we're still learning. And the men can use a healthy dose of the divine feminine too to find that balance, and I'm looking forward to that. You have a consciousness such as that of Athena. Athena was the protector of a lot of Greece, and she is a very powerful woman and a very smart woman and a strategist, and could lead people to war if they needed to go on a just cause, things like that. And I think women can be very powerful, but I don't think that power comes from looking like little men in dresses. And I keep hearing that phrase from a lot of people. And the last thing I want are more men out there who are just, women in dresses, who are little men in dresses. I think women have a particular gift or set of gifts and power and ways to express it that still need to come out. And I'm hoping that with the reemergence of the goddess energy that's going to happen. I see changes and balances in relationships. I've grown up, I'm a child of the baby boomers, and very much role expectations in marriages. And as we've all seen, the traditional marriage model is falling apart. We've discovered that marriage is a legal contract on a governmental basis, and holy matrimony is what you get in a church. And so I can see the argument of gays saying, why shouldn't we get the same benefits for two people linking together legally that the straights get? And from my point of view is, I'm sorry, I don't see why we can't have LLCs where groups of people come together of mixed sexes, and it protects property rights as far as the legal system needs, and takes care of kids as far as the legal system needs. But people might find it, with a nice way to come in and go out of that relationship and not have to go through something that's as, to me, as stilted as a divorce. It just kind of spells it out. But that forces a lot of people, both men and women, to really drill down. And I think this examination needs to be done of what does it mean to be in a relationship with another person? How much of this is my decision versus how much of this is my cultural upbringing, and it's a knee-jerk reaction. And I think the goddesses are going to help reform that so that women come into their power in defining other types of relationships where it's not so much this traditional thing of men are dominant, women are not dominant, who controls the money in the house, men like to think they do, women actually do in many cases, all these types of things. I think those are all needing to be stirred up, and I think the goddesses are going to do that as women come into their power. One of the really big things I see is for women around the whole planet to finally put their foot down and say, I'm not just here to have baby boys who will grow up and go into war to satisfy your need to have battles. I'm done with this, and I really hope that happens around the planet, where people just say, That's it. I'm not raising teenage boys to go off and fight your wars. We're done. Find another way. Find a way to negotiate out of this. Find a way to share. Find a way to quit having these arguments that are pedantic and go back thousands of years over religion. We're done. So I think that's the main thing that we're looking for. I'm sure, well, one final thing. I'll kind of wrap up with this. The other thing is looking at, you may have seen writings about the twin flame role or soulmates, but particularly the twin flame, and that's people who come together in a divine relationship that is totally balanced and totally based on unconditional love. And I see this as opening the door for that in many more situations rather than, okay, you know, if we get married, then this is my expectation of you, this is your expectation of me, this is how we share costs and all that. I can see the twin flame relationships coming through with unconditional love to get people past that. And hopefully we'll have more and more of that. And so as we touch that, just as I touch each of you in here and each of the viewers, you may represent 10,000 people behind you of a similar energy pattern, and hopefully this message will spread out to them. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.